I've learned a formula that works is that collaboration, if you're talking with one another, will lead to partnerships. Collaboration and partnerships establish trust. Once you have collaboration, partnerships, and trust, then you create hope. Now, hope isn't a tactic, it's an outcome. It's a result. Now, it goes on that you have to constantly be reviewing those and keep doubling back and making adjustments, but it's still a collaborative process. So what we are doing here in town is that we have labor and business talking to one another. Interestingly, in West Virginia a few years ago when the legislature passed the right to work laws, the Huntington Chamber of Commerce was the only chamber, I believe it was the only chamber in the state, that didn't take an active stand to be pressing for right to work, because they said one of the things that we've learned that we have to do is business and labor has to be able to work together in order to move forward. It doesn't mean that every business in town is organized, but they do recognize we're neighbors. One necessarily has to feed the other. You have to have the ability for those who are investing their capital to be able to make a profit on that capital, and there needs to be for those individuals who are working, knowing that they can live a life of dignity and have an assurance of security in their job for their family. Then you start to lift the community. Imagine this. This is a historically African-American neighborhood, high poverty level, but there's a hospital right next to it that brings in millions upon millions of dollars. But right next to it is a neighborhood that's writhing in poverty, in dilapidated buildings, broken families. Now, how do you have all that money, that wealth that's there in that hospital, and the healing that's occurring in that hospital, and then right next to it is that there's a neighborhood in the depths of poverty? That makes no sense to me. So what we started seeking to do is break down the silos, getting the CEO of the hospital sitting at the same table with some individuals who live in the neighborhoods. And we create what we call the Fairfield Alliance. It's a Fairfield neighborhood. And we have the president of the university, the president of the hospital, many of the senior leadership of the hospital and other businesses in the area. We have pastors and some political leaders, but also just residents of the neighborhood sitting there together, seeking to transform that. Marshall University in our city is the heartbeat of our community. In the early 80s, Marshall had a relatively new medical school, and now that medical school has grown and has developed a strong reputation in developing rural health initiatives, but also in various specialties. The engineering program has been created back at Marshall. One thing that I'm seeing is that we have an opportunity is that, sadly, what we have been dealing with is what the rest of the nation is having to deal with in the opioid epidemic. 72,000 people died last year. 4 years ago, our community came together to say we have to do something, first to acknowledge the problem, owning the problem, and as a result of that, being in a position to be able to respond to how to address the issue. Well, we've been so innovative with those things that are hiding in plain sight here, having resources that we never ever even thought. Those of us who grew up in Appalachia have in our DNA how to take things that have been otherwise cast away as unusable and being able to repurpose it for useful and usable things. Well, we've been able to take organizations and people and finding ways to be able to repurpose them, well, it occurs to me that if you accept that addiction is a disease just as diabetes is a disease and cancer is a disease, well, research centers require individuals of brilliant intellect to be able to start analyzing the causes of a disease. So you go to Houston, you go to Cleveland, you go to Rochester, Minnesota, and there are these huge medical clinics that are doing research in cancer. Well, that costs something, and you have to have a certain quality of intellect there to be able to do that. Why can't that be done right here? People say that we're the epicenter of the opiate epidemic, and that angers me when I hear that. But how you are able to repurpose things is that let's just accept that we have a problem here, not giving up to it, but accept that we have a problem here, and let's become the epicenter of the solution.